We're waiting right now on the lovely, fun, stupid ad that goes to run because for some strange reason, when I switched over, it tried to take me off of my own stream. Yay, fun. So I do have Eve up on one screen, so I do have the fleet where I can see things, and I can see things on the stream chat as well. However, I don't always catch what people are saying there. So, a couple things here. I do always recommend you wait towards the end of things to ask the questions. If you have a question and you're not sure you'll remember it, just type it up in a notepad or something like that, or you can even type it in the chat and I'll try to get back to it. I probably won't answer questions during the stream itself until the end, sorry, after the class is done. That way we keep things kind of rolling. You're never too old to learn new things, Caboose. This is a really fun class, I hope. I always like to hear feedback, so if you guys have what thoughts or ideas on improving it, they are always welcome. For those of you who are not in Horde that have joined us, you are very welcome. Thanks for coming. This is not a Horde specific class. Some of the things might be different in your corp how they handle things, but for the most part, it should all be useful information for you, regardless of what corp you're in. Obviously, the name of the class, as you can see on the screen, is EWAR 101, The Art of Nope. Uh, most of my molluses are named Nope just because of the fun salt effect you get when you use EWAR. What we're going to learn about is how to be useful and how to be impactful in an EWAR frigate. We'll focus on the different types of EWAR, the important skills to train, and how to fly the EWAR in fleets. Yes, very much join Horde. It is very fun and awesome, and I will talk them up forever and a day. But wherever you fly and have fun, EWAR is awesome. This is the important thing to take away from this. One of the first things that I like to go over with people is because in almost every corp, when you first join, you're a low skill pilot, you haven't gotten a lot of time in the game. People will say, "Oh, just jump in an EWAR so you can come on the fleet." What they don't say is anything about how to fly that EWAR, how to use it. So you're just kind of sitting there in the ship going, what do I do? This will help cover that. Now, the other thing that I like to really stress to people is you are not a throwaway ship. You are not a throwaway pilot. You are not just, oh, just bring in EWAR because you can't fly anything else. EWAR makes massive differences in fleets, even those flown by low skill pilots. We've had fights. There was a real famous fight, and I think it was 9 tack something, where a Keepstar was saved because of EWAR. Literally, the defenders just EWAR jammed out all of the enemy's fighters, so they couldn't kill the Keepstar they were trying to kill. It makes a big difference all over the place, everywhere you go, and I know in our corporation we often really have a different feel in how things go when we have a bunch of new players in EWAR with us because they enable us to do so much more. So don't ever let anyone tell you that, oh, you're just flying an EWAR. You're not important or so on and so forth. There's a couple things about EWAR that make them so great. One of them is that it doesn't take a lot of skill to get into the EWAR frigate, fly it, and have an event and make a difference. The other thing about it is they're usually very inexpensive ships, so it makes it easier for people to get in the beginning, and they don't take a lot of skills to fly and make a difference. So, I know that's a whole lot to throw at you in the beginning, but it's a thing that I really like to cover because I don't like hearing the just jump in an E-War. No, get in an E-War and you can help make a difference. So the next thing we talk about is the types of E-War modules. You've got one for each race, or types for each race. The Amarr, the Caldari, the Minmatar, and the Galente. Amarr have both tracking and guidance disruptors. One they have they're kind of a little weird and special that one affects their only turrets and the other only affects missile launchers. We'll go over that a little bit more as we go further in. Caldari use ECM or JAMS, which is the one you'll most commonly hear about and is used quite often. Minmatar use target painters, which is one of the only ones that is a little harder to see the effect of. The others, you almost always know that there's something happening with it. The target painters, you see a nice bright red beam going out from your ship to theirs, but you don't always see how much of a difference it makes. It makes it so that everything hits better. It applies the damage applies better. It's faster to lock targets. It's a very useful, very useful tool. Galente use sensor dampeners. Dampeners affect range and lock time, so how fast you lock a target, or how far away you can lock a target. Going back on that, the tracking and guidance disruptors, they do almost the same thing. One is they can have a range effect, or they can have a tracking effect. The tracking effect makes it that enemy shots, whoever you're affecting, their shots will miss more often. Each one has its weaknesses and its strengths, and again, we'll go over that as we go on. Now, this next slide is one of the most useful, in my opinion, for things. The great Quim put together our slideshow. I took a very basic thing and she made it so much better. But if you notice, each of the ships has a colored border around it. That's there for a reason, and it applies to ECM or jams, and we'll go over that again in a little more detail later on. But just basics, the Amar frigate is the Crucifier, and it has a gold or yellow border. Caldari ships are the Griffins, and they have a blue border or back. And notice that the border also matches the background color on these ships. That will be important a little bit later. Griffins again use the jams. Crucifiers use the disruptors. Vigils or Minmatar are red and use the painters, and Galente use the Mollis and have a green background. That we'll get into that again later. So now let's talk into a little bit more detail about a specific ship. We're going to go start with one that we use quite often, the Amar EWAR, the Crucifier. To give you an idea, going back again to how impactful these ships can be, the the Amar Crucifiers were how we as Horde, when we first came to Geminate, were able to take Ferox fleets and beat Naga fleets that were coming into our space because of the Crucifiers. Because they couldn't just kite away from us. They couldn't take advantage of a lot of their ship's strengths because we were countering them with the Crucifiers. So if you look at a Naga on the market, for example, and I'm going to actually pull that up right now so that this is relevant. Look at a Naga and see how much that thing costs. So you're talking about just the hull on a Naga right now in my area of space is about 60 million ISK. And that's without fittings, so obviously you're going to want to have more invested in it than that. But then you look at the Crucifier without fittings, and you're talking about 450,000 ISK, not even a million ISK, and that ship was shutting down those Nagas and making them lose the fights. They use tracking disruptors, which are the ones that affect turrets, and guidance disruptors, which affect missiles. Now I'm going to go a little bit more in detail on that right now because, what's a turret, what's not, so on and so forth. Basically, anything that is a hybrid, basically the Minmatar guns, the hybrid turret guns, or the lasers that Amar use. Those three are turrets. So those three types of things are affected by the tracking disruptors. If it's not one of those three, a tracking disruptor will have absolutely no effect on it. The guidance disruptor, kind of the same thing, except it affects all missile things. We have checked it out. It does affect bombs, actually, believe it or not. Not a huge effect though, because bombs kind of apply evenly. But it can make the difference in saving a ship or not. Of course, at the same time, if a bomb is coming in and you're in a Crucifier, you want to warp off. You don't want to be there. But they're much more impactful when you're talking about all the different types of missiles that can be fired out of different ships, including torpedoes. So if you've ever run across the covert ops fleets that are all cloakied up and such, they usually have torpedo launchers fit. These can counter effect that. It makes them either have less range or apply less of their damage. So As you can see here, we talk about the weaknesses of it. It cannot affect other Logi or other EWAR, so it can't affect something that's not a turret or a missile launcher. It can only affect those types of things. You can put scripts in these disruptors, which will focus them. So normally without a script, they will affect both range and tracking. You put a script in there, and it will focus on only one. It will no longer affect the other. So it will only affect range or only affect tracking, but it affects it to a much greater degree by doing so. Next, we go to the one that makes a lot of people cry. The Caldari EWAR Griffin. Um, they use jammers or ECM, and these we have to go into kind of a little bit of detail about how they work because they're very specific and unique. They specifically affect the ship's targeting. So whenever you lock up an enemy ship, you get that nice little icon on your screen that shows you have them locked. A successful jam from an ECM module unlocks the target. It keeps it unlocked for 30 seconds. At the end of that 30 seconds, you can relock the target. It does not work every time, however. All the rest of the EWAR modules always have an effect if you've hit somebody with it. Their effect is not stopped, except for in rare cases like things that have a siege mode that prevents them from being affected by that. Generally speaking, capital ships and things of that size have such a thing, but not everything. They have 5 subtypes of jams, and I actually have another slide that we'll go into that a little bit more on, but they are multispectral, which is also commonly referred to as rainbow jams, because they affect everything equally. Radar, which is Minmatar, magnetometric, which is Galente, gravimetric, which is Caldari, and radar, which is Amar. Now, this last point on here, this is a recent change that you really need to be aware of. It's really won't change how you fly the ship in a fleet because it's always going to be the same. If something tries to target you, you warp off and come back. We'll go into that in more detail. But if you jam someone, they can still target your ship, and if they'd already locked you, they keep you targeted. They keep you locked. You are basically immune to they can still lock you even if they can't lock anybody else if your jams are successful. It was a balance issue they put in recently. Now this next screen comes back to where you saw the colors on the frames of the ships and all that. This is something that until you learn it, feel free to, take a screenshot, keep this somewhere, do whatever you want to do for this. This is very useful for a lot of people or just write down a little note, sticky note that you can keep it on. Radar affects Amar, which is gold or yellow, just like the background. Radar affects Minmatar, which is red, just like the background. Gravimetric affects Caldari, which is blue, like their background. This is the thing that drives me nuts. That magnetometric really should be a much more different green, in my opinion. It looks almost blue, and so that can throw you off sometimes. But that's green for the Galente and the Galente background. So that weird light blue, almost green, that's the one for Galente. And again, multispectral affect all of them. Now you go, well, why wouldn't I just use multispectral affects all of them? There are 2 reasons. One, multispectrals have a shorter range than the racial specific jammers, and they're not as strong. They have what's basically, put it numbers wise, they have a 2-point jam strength across the board, whereas the racial ones, for example, the Amar, will have a 3-point strength against Amar ships and a 1-point strength against others. A lot of times when you go on a fleet, if the FC knows what you're going to be going up against, then you'll know which ones to fit. Otherwise, you could do multispectral. You could fit one of each. Normally speaking, on the Griffins, you usually only fit 3, so you'd have to leave one off. Not a big deal. It doesn't mean just because you have a radar jams on your Griffin that they won't affect an Amar ship or a Caldari or Galente ship. It's just they have a less likely chance to successfully affect them. Still on the jam topic, we have a nice little thing called ECM drones or Hornet EC300s. These are very awesome little drones, especially when you're out ratting or things like that. Um, they do require skills, a higher level of skills to use. You have to have advanced drone avionics, drones 5, and electronic warfare 4. So a little bit more of an investment, but if you're doing any kind of ratting or things like that, these can be great and useful ships. It can even be very useful in solo PvP and other things as well. Um, Now they're little drones, so they're easily killed by other small ships and such like that. But what they can be used for is to break tackle, so you can warp off and get away if someone's got you jammed, or again, just to break their lock so you can kill them faster if you've got guns on your ship. Um, the drones themselves, unlike if you jam someone in a Griffin, then they can still target you. If your ECM drones in whatever ship you're in jam someone, they can only target the drone, not you. It's a very nice and useful thing. If you notice on this slide that Quinn put together, there is a YouTube link on the bottom that shows how frustrated people can get when you have these things. They're great, great little drones and useful. Again, a bit of a train to get those skills up, but those skills are ones you're going to use in almost anything else, anyways. So they're not bad skills to have. Next, we go to my personal favorite ship that I fly quite often, especially to respond to people who have been tackled in Horde space. So I mean, it's useful anywhere. Partially, I love it because it looks like the Slave One that Boba Fett flies, but also because it's a very useful ship. The Galente uses sensor dampeners. This is again just like everything except for the jams. It has a 100% success rate when it hit. If you hit somebody with it, they're going to be affected. What they do is reduce the range that the enemy ship can lock at. Not the range of their weapons, not the range of any module they have, but the range that the ship itself can lock something at. So this will affect pretty much everything on a ship. It also increases target lock time or scan res, which is very useful to use against enemy EWAR and things like that. Again, we'll go a little more into details on that. It also uses scripts just like the disruptors. So if you want to really focus on reducing the enemy's range, you can throw in range scripts. And if you're trying to stop the enemy EWAR from being able to switch targets quickly, hit them with the scan resolution scripts. Uh, Scripts are very useful, can swap out easily, very cheap. Generally speaking, however many dampening modules you have on a ship, you want to have that many of each type of script so you can swap back and forth. Same thing going back to the EMAR disruptors. Now we look at the Minotaur EWAR, the Vigil. This is the target painter. A little harder to explain at first, but if this one is where I get most of the questions at the end of the class, so if you've got questions, we will go over it. Don't hesitate to feel like asking them towards the end. They're amazing. All right. They increase the enemy's signature radius. This is a term that if you've not heard in other games, it's very, very vital in EVE Online and makes a huge difference to everything. Your signature radius is basically how big of a blip you are on the enemy radar. And the bigger of a radius you have, the easier it is to lock you, so they lock you faster, and the more damage applies to you. Uh, if you hear about people talking about signature tanking or SIG tanking, basically that means they're trying to keep their signature radius as small as possible so it's hard to hit them. It's the main tank for most frigates, including EWAR frigates. Uh, it specifically affects missiles. Missiles specifically do more damage the bigger an enemy's signature radius is. This is why a lot of times if you see people fighting missile boats, they will turn off their MWDs, their micro warp drives, because micro warp drives increase your signature radius by a fairly decent amount. Uh, Also, why you do not ever want to have an MWD active if a bomb is coming in on you. Most EWAR frigates have micro warp drives on them so they can run away when they need to. This is something to be aware of when you're in such a ship. If you see an enemy bomber or bomber wing come on grid, Turn that MWD off. If at all possible, warp away. If you have your MWD on and a bomb explodes near you, guarantee your frigate is popped. You're gone. This part is not super vital, but I like to go over it just so everybody kind of knows what happens and how it is. If you go to your character sheet in game and click on skills, one of the skills listed is electronic systems. Everything for the E warships that we've talked about today, all the applicable skills are in here. Uh, the attributes that affect them. So if you really enjoy EWAR, you're really loving it, and you're gonna skill train everything for it to get it awesome. You want intelligence and memory. Those are the two skills that most affect, or two attributes that affect training these skills the most. The universal skills, so the ones that affect all forms of EWAR, are frequency modulation and long distance jamming. Frequency modulation gives a 10% bonus to the fall off range on all of your EWAR things. And long distance jamming, believe it or not, affects the optimal range of your EWAR. Sorry, my brain just ran away from me for a second. Now we talk about the AMAR disruptors. Those skills are weapon destabilization and weapon disruption. And then you have electronic warfare and signal dispersion for the jammers. Signature focusing and target painting for the target painters and vigils. And sensor leaking and signal suppression are the skills that specifically affect dampeners. Not a whole lot of there. If you really want to know more about each of these skills, of course, if you're in the character screen, go to electronic systems, and then you can highlight each skill individually. It'll tell you exactly what it does. Very useful things. Now, this is the slide that we talk a whole lot on and don't go off of for a while, just to give everybody a heads up. How to fly with a fleet. Fleeting up. This is the part that so often is kind of left out for people, and not cool in my opinion to not give people an idea of what's going on. So the first rule of a fleet is pretty easy. It's called read the message of the day, or MOTD. If you do not know how to see the MOTD, say you join a fleet and a whole bunch of people are talking, so it's scrolling up super fast on you. In the fleet chat screen, there is a channel setting cogwheel in the top left. If you click that, one of the options is reload message of the day. If you're actually in my fleet right now and you did that, you would see the Twitch stream link so you could get that and bring it back up. All of our FCs are angry, and over half of them have some sort of accent, so I don't know who you're talking about. Anyway, the second rule of fleet is ask an FC or an NBI questions before you undock if at all possible. Now, they might not be called NBI in whatever corporation you're in. In Horde, we have a group of people who are dedicated to answering questions for newbies, new players, called NBI or Newbie Initiative. I'm one, for example. Miriana, who's here with us recording the program, is another. And Quim, who put together this absolutely awesome slideshow, is a third. There's lots of us out there. Anytime you need us, ask. But whatever corporation you're in, they generally have people who will answer questions for you, even if you just have to ask it in your normal fleet chat. The big thing to take away from this is try to ask your questions before you undock. Couple reasons for that. One, you can't change things in your ship after you've undocked most of the time. If you needed to grab something, you don't have it, so on and so forth. It gets you. Yeah, ask for cookies. Good one, Dragon. Some of the basic ideas to ask is what's the preferred EWAR? If it's not in the ping that's gone out for the fleet or in the message of the day, which EWAR ships they want you to fly, you can ask. Be like, hey, which EWAR would you prefer us be in? And they'll tell you Crucifier, Mollusk, Griffin, Vigil, etc. Or they'll say we don't care, bring any of them. One of the nicest things about EWAR is they really do apply effectively across everything. If you're flying ECM, ask what color jams you should bring. If you're using disruptors, should you bring missile disruptors or turret disruptors? Should you bring 2 missile and 1 turret? So on and so forth. These are the good questions to ask before you go. Now, I really need to change this slide so that Target Painters says something different. The paint primary is so confusion. The reason that I put this in here is there's a very big difference in how you're going to use your target painters if there's 20 vigils in a fleet than if there's 1 or 2. If there's 1 or 2 vigils, you're going to put your target painters on the targets the FC calls. Whoever they're going to be shooting, that's who you want your painters on. However, if you have 20 or more vigils, what you want to do is spread those target painters out. You want them all over the grid. Couple reasons for this. One, it makes it much easier for everybody to lock targets. It gives the FC more options of who to shoot. Two, you will annoy the hell out of the Logi. As a person who flies Logi very often, I can verify this as fact, because the very first thing that happens when someone notices they are being target painted is they broadcast for reps, which is what they should do in most cases. Now, let's go with my example of there's 20 vigils in a fleet. Each of these vigils has 2 target painters on it. If 40 people broadcast for reps all at once, the Logi are going to go start having a twitch in their eye and be like, ah. So it's a very good tactic and very useful, and you can make a very big difference in a fight doing things like that. A tactic, the most maybe dependent on your how this is used is dependent on your corp. So don't say, well, Thelzar said do this if you're not in Horde, because I don't want you to get shot by your FC. But a really good tactic a lot of times is if you've got the 20 vigils, find the 2 targets or 3 depending on how many painters you have fitted, whose names are closest to yours in the enemy fleet. Paint them. And there you go. You've got your 3 or 2, and you're driving people insane. Otherwise, of course, if you're one of very few on grid or with the fleet, then you want to hit the targets the FC calls so that they can make the effect. Again, the effect is going to be people are going to lock it faster, and their damage is going to apply better. So in a little cheap, inexpensive ship, you make an entire fleet more effective. This is why you guys can make such a difference. Now, some of the next things you want to do, I think I have them. Okay, good. I do have them here. This is where we start getting into a little more of the nitty gritty about what are you going to do when you're out there with the fleet? How are you flying? When you actually go to engage a group of enemies, you should disable fleet warp. I know this sounds crazy because most people are telling you, no, you warp with the fleet, you warp with the fleet. You don't want to do that in an EWAR for a couple reasons. One, your biggest tank is range. Every EWAR ship is designed to have a massively long range so that you can apply your effect outside of the range of the enemy guns so they don't just pop you right away and get you off grid. What this means, in case you are not aware, when you disable fleet warp, when the fleet warps, the FC warps a fleet, you do not warp with them. The second reason for this is if you warp with the fleet on top of a group of enemies, you're in there with all the rest of the ships right on top of the enemies, and 90% of your tank is now gone because you're way too close. When the fleet warps off, you warp off, of course. But when they warp back, you warp back at 20, 30, 50, whatever you need to do, depending on the ships you're fighting with. If they've got brawly fit ships, you wouldn't warp in at like 70. If they've got long range or kitey, you'd only warp in at 20 off of them, so on and so forth. Another thing you can do a lot of times as a new player, if you're not sure, anchor on your own Logi. Whoever your Logi anchor is a good anchor for EWAR. Reason being is they usually keep at range as well. And it then also puts you in place to protect the Logi if enemies come in on them. Avoid bubbles if at all possible. Obviously, when 90% of your defense is if somebody locks you, you warp off, you don't want to be in a bubble. This is not always possible in big fleet fights. If you can't affect the enemies without being in a bubble, then you're in a bubble. If you lose your ship, generally speaking, it's inexpensive, easy to jump in a new one and come back. Obviously, it's much better to not have to reship and come back, but again, not as big a deal. Now, both of those all apply into this third point very obviously. Keep range. So if you are in any EWAR ship right now, and actually you can do it in almost any ship if you have a gun fit of any kind, but if you're in an EWAR specifically, you can look at the EWAR module and it will tell you range within and optimal range within. Don't worry about optimal range within because that's usually not someplace you're going to want to be, especially not in big fleet engagements. You want that range within. Like, for example, on one of my molluses, I have a range of 121 km on the dampener on it. So I want to be probably about 110, 111, maybe even 100 km away from the enemies at most points because it gives me plenty of range to affect them and do what I'm supposed to do and keeps me out of range of most of their guns. That's the idea with all the E-Wars. You want to be out of the range of the enemy, but still within range to affect them with your modules. Uh, Warp off when targeted. I think I've said that about maybe 100 times now. I don't know. So when you get yellow boxed, that's when you want to be warping away. Not when you're red boxed, because a lot of ships and fleets that you engage and stuff like that will lock targets together for one. For two, red means they're already shooting you. If they yellow box you, so that little flashing yellow box is appearing on the enemy ships, that means they can hit you with their guns and you need to warp off. And then warp right back in, by the way, because even if you're just making them waste time locking you to make you warp off and come back, that's time they're not shooting your fleet's logi. That's time that's not shooting your fleet's DPS. You are still having an impact. If you're warping off and warping back, like every time you land on grid, they're locking you up. That means you've done a very good job and you've farmed your salt, and they're really annoyed with you, uh, and they're not shooting someone else. So you're doing your job even if you're not applying your EWARs at that point. Priority targets. This is a obviously very important thing with what you're flying. For crucifiers, the only thing you can affect is enemy DPS. Now there is a slight side to that. However, crucifiers can carry 9 drones in their drone bay. I believe you can only launch 4 at a time with good drone skills, but still, that means you have plenty of drones in your drone bay. If somebody has got tackle or other EWAR on your logi, put your drones out. Go take them off. Get them off of your logi. You can't affect them with your disruptors, so you still want to be affecting the DPS, but your drones can help save the logi and protect the logi. I don't know if you've ever been on fleets with logi. You know if you lose your logi, you lose the fleet. Designated decoy, good one. Then you go to the Griffins. So priorities of the Griffins are enemy logistics first, enemy DPS second, enemy EWAR third. However, any of those immediately jumps to the top of the list if they're attacking your logi. Griffins can only carry 1 drone, but you can still put that drone out and put it on things that are attacking your logi if you want. Most of the time, things that you're affecting with your jams won't be in range of your drones, so it's not as big of a deal. You won't put them out very often. Maulus, same priorities and tactics. However, the Maulus can carry up to 6 drones. So like the Crucifiers, if you see your logi being hit by anything, put them out, make a difference. Another tactic you can do with Crucifiers and Maulus is once you're comfortable and feel confident in what you're doing, take out enemy drones, enemy fighters, anything like that with them because you know you're doing your job as a crucifier or a Maulus, applying your damps or your disruptors where they need to be. Your drones aren't going to necessarily make all that much of a difference on killing something else, and you're probably not going to be in range to put those drones on enemy ships. What you can do, however, is clear off the drones that are on your fleet's ships. Really can make a huge difference. I know this sounds like, oh, well, I mean, they're just 5, warrior ones or whatever. They're not going to make that big of a difference. Well, if there's 20 of you and each of you has 5 warrior ones, you're all wiping out the enemy drones. Their drones are going to be gone quick. If the fleet you're fighting happens to be Ishtars or something like that that counts on drones for a lot of their combat damage, you can really make a difference in the fight, above and beyond what you're already doing with your EWAR. The Vigil, this is another one that only has one drone can be fitted. So again, it's not going to be a huge difference. It's still useful. Your primary target is the primary target of the fleet, unless you're using the tactics we mentioned earlier when you have a bunch of you. If there's only a few of you, your primary, whatever the fleet's primary targets are, those are your primary targets, with a secondary focus on enemy logistics. If the Logi are in range of your target painters without putting you in range of the enemy fleet, that's not a bad thing to do. Um, and then, of course, the last really is a good thing. When in doubt, ask your EWAR FC if you have one specifically. For a Horde specific, you know, that whoever the NBI is in the NBI wing, if they don't have an EWAR wing specifically. If your corporation, you know, if you've got a bunch of EWAR going out with a fleet, lots of times you will have an EWAR wing. So you'll have somebody in charge of that wing, kind of giving ideas and such. The other nice thing, however, about EWAR is you don't have to be told what to do 90% of the time. You should already know. That's what all of this is about and why we do the class, so that people can get that idea, go on the fleets, have an impact, have fun, and you're not having to try and focus and do everything exactly as everybody else is saying it. You're flying on your own and still making a difference and having fun. Uh, wow, I can't believe we got through that already. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for coming to the class. My name's Thelzar Calzahar, as you see on this last slide. Quim Fighton is the awesome and amazing person who took my very basic, very boring slideshow and made it the one that is much prettier and much nicer to look at, that you all got to enjoy. And now I open up the Twitch stream first for questions and stuff. So if you have a question and you're in the Twitch stream, go ahead and ask. You can also ask in Fleet if you're with us in Fleet, but I would try to do Twitch stream first for right now. So anybody got questions, feedback, comments, all the above fun things? I will not lie with that. I will not argue with that, Epic. She is absolutely amazing. Um, X Readies, yes, actually, we are recording it specifically to be able to put that in there. Um, so as soon as we can, we'll get it up on the Pandemic Horde YouTube channel, and it will be there. So starting with the real bones, ECM cruisers are actually used a lot of times by people, but not as much anymore because of the fact that they can still be targeted now. Instead of, you know, jams stopping them from everything from being targeted, jams stop everything except the jammer ship from being targeted. See, one ship that's easiest for beginners. I really like the Vigil's probably the easiest one to use in EWAR to begin with, and then next would be the Maulus, the Crucifier, and the Griffin. While they're awesome ships, you do have to kind of know. Okay, well, are they shooting missiles or are they shooting guns? For the Crucifier and with the Griffin, okay, which type of ship are they flying? What race is it? So I know which jams I should use, so on and so forth. But they can all be used. Uh, and as Dragon House put it, by the way, I know he was probably talking about the cruisers, but the truth is, for anything in EWAR, you are a giant target. This is why you always want to warp in at a distance, always be ready to warp off if you get targeted, so on and so forth. Um, there's lots of dead molluses on my kill board where that were me. So, oh, very good point, Epic. I wasn't planning on including the Q&A session. Honestly, I think we don't want to get it too big. Um, so, Mir, we want to make sure we cut off that part of it. But a very good point, Epic, and thank you very much for that feedback. Um, If someone is in already locked, does sensor dampening do something with that? Um, it depends. So if you are you talking RB3 about if you specifically have the scan resolution dampener fit script in? Because if so, really it doesn't have an effect unless they try to lock a new target. So it will only affect them when they're trying to lock something new. If they've already locked something, it won't have an effect. That's part of why normally, most often, will use the range disruption scripts on dampeners. But if you're fighting Logi and you are affecting Logi, that's when you want to use the scan res because Logi have to change targets constantly at getting to who is their primary target. EWAR is for everyone's, and it's a fun, awesome way to get going, and it's a really good starter ship for people when they're starting into the game because a you don't have to have a lot of skills to have an impact, and b when you're first learning and trying to figure out how to do PvP and all that kind of thing, you don't know all the enemy ships, what they can do, how they affect things, what's the best counter to them. In an E-War ship, your counter is the same against everything. Oh, it's locking me up. I run away, and then come back at range. Any other questions for me, gang? Stack limit. Oh, that's a really good point, and I should have actually discussed this in the class. But on any E-War, there is what they call diminished returns. So if you have 20 people target painting the same target, uh, then it's not gonna. The 20th target painter is not gonna have anywhere near as much effect as the first one. But they still do make a difference. Even if it's a negligible amount because of the stack limit or whatever, there's still an effect to doing it. Also, say for example, if three people are range dampening the same target, each one of them is not going to have the same impact. But if one of you has to warp off, there's still two people doing so. Nice, real bones. All right. Any other questions or concerns for me, gang? Feedback? Epic mission. That was very good feedback again. By the way, I really appreciate you. I do try to do this class fairly often. I've fallen off and slacked off a bit here, but so if you have friends or people that you think Caboose, wait until after we leave Twitch and then you can. Um, in ratting, absolutely, Zun. There's a couple things you need to know about it if you're using EWAR in ratting. Number one, you will aggro everything if you are using it. So don't try to if you come in with a Griffin to help your buddy, chances are things are going to try to shoot you instead of your buddy if you use EWAR. Rats really hate EWAR. Part of the reason they hate it is because they can have a big impact. Um, no, no, not at all, RB. I know a lot of people that like to use target painters, especially if they're using bigger ships or bigger, what do you call it, like fighters or bigger drones, and they're in sites that have a lot of little frigate enemies. A target painter can make it much easier for the drones to hit the damage. The jamming modules, not so much, Mark Tesh. However, the ECM drones only make it where they can target the drone, not you. I mentioned that earlier. So ECM drones are still very useful in solo PvP. um, now that's a really good point. Actually, backing up a second, guys, for ratting or even responding to rats, say a dread has dropped in and somebody's tackled on screen and you happen to be nearby at an E-War ship, jump in there, try and get aggro. Throw your E-War jams on something or whatever else. You are more than likely going to save that other person. You might still lose your E-War ship because they're going to focus you and you'll pop really fast. But if they do that, let's say someone's out ratting in a VNI in the Serpentis space, for example, because the Serpentis rats actually tackle the Dread tackles, which is rough. Um, you go in, you get the aggro off of the VNI or whatever ship, and the Dread pops your Mollis or whatever else. They get their VNI out. Your Mollis again, you know, fully fitted is like 1 to 2 mil. So it's a very cheap ship. Anybody worth their salt that you save is going to pay you for your lost ship, and you made a you've definitely made a difference helping somebody else out. All of the EWAR ships are also great. I know I kind of mentioned it briefly, but a little more in detail. They're great for responding to friendlies getting tackled. If you're in nullsec for the most part, and somebody's got one of your friendly ratters or miners or something tackled, and they go, "Help! I need help." Show up and get that thing off of them. If you happen to jam something, yeah, it can target you now, but that expensive ship can get out. Mullis, you damp its range to the point that they can no longer keep that thing tackled. It warps off. It's gone. You warp out. You're gone. Beautiful. When you're responding to help people who have, in our area we call it Wing up. You throw up 3 Ws and say what's on you, so on and so forth. So if someone's requesting help and you're responding to go help them in an E-War ship, again, like I mentioned before, warp in at range. Don't warp on top of them. You don't want to get tackled too. You can warp at range, hit your stuff on that guy, whatever it is. Hopefully save them. They warp off. You warp off. Everything's good. Um, if you have a big group of people responding, then you make it easier for everybody to kill the bad guy, so on and so forth. Yeah, target painters, moon mining fleets, for example. If you're responding or helping or bringing something to a moon mining fleet because you want to be able to help them out, a target painter. Um, if you have someone manning the moon mining station, the Athenor, and you target paint an enemy ship that shows up, that Athenor can lock that ship much faster, and a typical Athenor can nude out almost any subcap very quickly with what it's got built into it. So you can basically defang a ship pretty fast. Yeah, a procurer with a target painter on it's a beautiful thing. Um, a procurer with tackle on it can be very frightening. Uh, Same thing like that. That's a pretty common thing. Thank you, Darkora. That's a really cool thing. I will, if you can Discord me that info, I would greatly appreciate it. Sorry, guys, that was something in fleet chat. If you're not in the fleet, so you don't see it. We're getting kind of close on time here, so I don't want to keep everybody longer than planned. We're actually doing really well. Oh yeah, most most horde mining fleets are hungry. We like killing things. We've gotten some T3Cs, which has been great. Uh, Wonderful feeling in a procurer to get a kill mark from a T3C. T3C is a tier 3 cruiser. For those that don't know, they're very high end skill ships. But I'm going to go ahead and probably wrap it up here. If you are not in Horde, I highly recommend getting some friends together in whatever corporation you're in, jump in some E-War ships, go out, to a safe point in your space, and hit each other with the E-War so you can see what effects happen. Like have them hit you with dampeners so you can see the difference. Have them hit you with target painters and disruptors. You won't see as much of a difference, but at least for jams and dampeners, you can really see the difference if you go out together. Other than that, absolutely. As Zunlin says, join Horde. Um, I have a blast doing these classes. I try to do them often. If you have questions or concerns, my name in Twitch is the same as my name in game. You are more than welcome to convo me. I don't care what corporation you're in. If you're asking me a question about EWAR and such, I like making the game bigger and better for everybody involved. So
Yeah, you and Dwell wouldn't know nothing about that.
Have you hidden